September 1962, Rachel Carson. 1973, me. 1977, Star Wars with Carrie Fisher. Now, I had to ask my students about that one, and they said, Sarah, she was the first intergalactic princess. And they said she was not just a pretty face, she made policy. Well, hopefully when they do the next Big Time magazine, there will be even more women who are featured and who make policy. But you and I together, and people like us, I do think, have changed the world. Changed the world in terms of not just one choice being available, but all choices being available, and for people to get to determine in bigger and bigger outlines their own lives. Now, there are some things I still haven't done, I don't think I want to do. One of those I was thinking about this morning because Frank Blau, who is our photographer, Frank, where are you? Oh, he's down on the floor taking pictures. He is the official photographer for the Rat City Roller Girls. And they beat our Texas team last year. But if you ever want special seats, talk to Frank. He's the one who knows how to do it. But we have changed the world together. I look back on that experience. There are several, I was talking to one of the board members a while ago, and she said, I'm bringing a couple of law students who are so excited about Roe versus Wade and others. I was introduced just recently as being historic. It's not the way I think of myself, but I can understand why. But I think about that time long ago. This is the 35th anniversary. And I was thinking about those times, like the book, which you as NARAL, Pro-Choice Washington, are publishing, of stories, the stories of women who didn't have choices and who sometimes ended up in desperate or dying situations. I started working on the case about the same time some of you did. A few of you did. Luckily, there are a lot of young faces here. And it was a time when abortion in Texas was totally illegal. And the result was a lot of women were going to Mexico. A lot of women were ending up in back alley situations. And our public hospitals in Texas had wards that were called the IOB wards, the infected obstetrics wards, where women who had done self-abortion or had illegal or ended up in desperate medical situations were essentially in places where they could get care. There were two kinds of people who came to me. I have to tell you a quick story. When I finished law school in 1967. There were 5 women in my law school class out of 250. Now it'd be 50% women in just about any law school class, but I was one of the few, and one of the problems with that was trying to get a job. So finally, the woman who was head of placement, a woman who I still adore, I went to her and talked to her about the fact that no firm would offer me an interview out of Austin and they wouldn't pay my way if they did. And she thought that was wrong, so she went and talked to the dean and he said, we're going to change the policy, and they did. So the policy became, if you want to pay the way for any graduate of the University of Texas Law School to come interview, you have to pay whether it's a man or a woman. And you better prove to us you're serious about this, so you better pay a woman, at least to come interview. So I was the first woman whose way was paid to go interview. I flew from Austin to Dallas, 187 miles, but it was a breakthrough. And the man who was in charge of my interview kept saying things like, well, you know, young lawyers have to work late. Women have to be home to cook dinner. How could you do both? Or things like, really, to train a young lawyer, we have to be able to cuss them out. How could we cuss you? You're a woman. A lot of other major objections, and you would know I did not get that job. 13 years later, that man, senior partner of the firm, wanted to be a federal judge. There were 3 people who had to sign off on that nomination to go to the president: the Attorney General of the United States, the Congressional Liaison for the White House, and me. Now, you know, if he had called me and said, I'm up, I hear you're holding up my nomination, could I come visit with you? I would have said yes. I would have tried to look into whether the firm had changed their policies and what kind of hires they had made since, but I would have said yes. He didn't do that. If I had been a man, I think he would have. But what he did was talk to another Texas lawyer, good friend of mine, and that lawyer called me and said, Sarah, you must approve this man. That is what I call the fatal error. Because I didn't have to. And once they called me, I understood he should not be on the federal bench. So I went to the president and said, you know, if you tell me I have to approve him, I will. But otherwise, I won't. And he said, no, if that's the way you feel, you can do that. So he never got to be a federal judge. And he shouldn't have. But in a minute, when I talk about federal judgeships, no, don't give me 5. That's not a signal I know. What? Okay. So he shouldn't have been a federal judge. But that's why his president is so important, and I'm going to come back to that. So I didn't get a job with a law firm. As I know now, that was the best thing that happened to me, because I ended up working for a law professor and was working at the law school in what was then called Boys Town, because all the young professors were men. And a group of women, 2 men with them, came and basically said, we need some legal help. Can you help us? And I said, well, explain the problem. They said, well, first, the University of Texas Health Center has a policy that no woman may have access to birth control unless she certifies she's within 6 weeks of marriage. So they said Texas is not always leading in the forward column. So they said, first we need to tell women about contraception. But they said some of the women who come to us say they're already pregnant, they ask for information about abortion, and we've gathered it. They said we've gathered where to go in Mexico. There were good places in Mexico. There were also some really horrible places in Mexico. California had become legal. Now you remember that Ronald Reagan was the governor who signed that bill into law. It was only when he ran for president that he became so opposed. New York was legal. That wonderful woman, Constance Cook, who had been the leader there, and a really courageous Jewish legislator who, on the day it was up for a vote in the House, it was about to go down by 1 vote, and they were, you know how they'll hold the vote open for one more person? And he stood up and he said, Jewish high holy days are coming soon, and my wife and my daughter would never forgive me if it was my vote that meant this bill failed. I changed my vote. It's probably going to cost me my political career, but I vote aye. It changed, and New York became a haven for people from all over the country. Washington was certainly leading. It was a time when there were a few bright spots, but you had to have a good bit of money to get there. And so these women said, could we tell women the good places to go, or would we be prosecuted as accomplices to the crime of abortion? Didn't know the answer to that, but I did know what to say. I will go to the law library and look it up. So I went to the law library. Now, if they had said, would you mind doing a U.S. Supreme Court case? I would have said, I don't think I could do that. I had done uncontested divorces, wills for people with no money, and 1 adoption for my uncle. My total legal experience. But I was willing to do it for free. A lot of you have done such important things for free. We filed Roe versus Wade, 1 half lost, half in the lower court, appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. It turned out some other cases ahead of ours, the wrong parties appealed, various things happened. And so I'll never forget the day I got a notice from the Supreme Court saying, we have accepted Roe versus Wade. Get ready. It was that moment that you start thinking, I better find some people to help me on this. So luckily, a lot of the law school professors helped me. Part of it was that they had never been to the U.S. Supreme Court. So they would do moot courts with me because I was going to get to go.